Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the sun-drenched world of ancient Rome. Just as the morning dust begins to settle, the chatter in the marketplace fades, and the streets grow hushed for reasons that might surprise you. You're not late to the action, in fact, you're right on time. Because in a moment, the entire city will down tools, halt debates, leave temples half-swept, and do something incredibly radical by modern standards: it will nap. Yes, in the Roman Empire, the midday rest wasn't a guilty pleasure. It was a civic expectation. You walked down a stone-paved road, the soles of your sandals worn smooth, eyes adjusting to the glare bouncing off marble. Bakers, butchers, senators, and slaves, everyone's going through their morning routine in a tight window of productivity. And then, like clockwork, the tempo drops. The meridies, or middle of the day, approaches, and with it comes an unspoken rule: pause everything, and rest. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not because life in Rome is brutal, though it is, but because the pressure to nap properly would break you. In Rome, napping was an art, a duty, and, yes, occasionally, a competitive sport. Your neighbors notice if you don't nap. Officials patrol the city to enforce rest. Your dreams could even be used as political statements. It's nap time, ancient Rome style, and there's a lot more writing on it than just shutting your eyes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're listening from. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself wandering through the Sabura district, where the smell of garum fish sauce is mercifully giving way to fresh bread and olive oil. At first glance, the chaos seems eternal. Children shouting, vendors bartering, laundry dripping from every window. But something curious is about to happen. The chaos is folding in on itself. Roman culture is famous for many things: its aqueducts, its blood sport, its legal systems, but less talked about is the Roman obsession with structured daily rhythm. And at the heart of that rhythm sits meridiatio, the midday nap. Unlike modern siestas, which you might associate with Spanish-speaking countries, the Roman nap wasn't just for the rich or the rural. It was institutional, it was official, and yes, enforced. As the sundial's shadow slides across a carved lion's paw, a municipal bell rings, quiet and ceremonial. It's not just telling the hour. It's telling everyone, from the fishmonger to the magistrate, to lie down, shut their eyes, and pretend they aren't mentally reviewing their scrolls or calculating their debts. Even the courts adjourn. No trials, no speeches, no deals made. The pause is not only respected, it's protected. This is no lazy culture. Romans are early risers, known to pack their entire workday into the first few hours after dawn. The streets are busiest at sunup, the forums buzzing before breakfast. But come midday, the collective energy flags, and rather than push through with coffee and motivational quotes, Rome surrenders. It leans in. That's where you find yourself now, leaning in, too. There's a shaded wall nearby, its surface warm from the sun but still cool enough to rest against. Above you, laundry flaps lazily, catching the breeze. The city exhales. Somewhere, water drips from a fountain spout carved into the shape of a lion. It's a sound meant to lull, not startle. But it's not just about comfort. This midday pause served practical purposes. It protected people from the searing Mediterranean heat. It gave the body time to digest the massive Roman lunch. No sad desk salads here. Mind you, we're talking chickpea stews, boiled eggs, wine-soaked bread, and possibly dormice. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether this cultural embrace of napping was born out of medical theory, seasonal necessity, or pure social engineering. Some scrolls suggest physicians recommended it to balance bodily humors. Others cite political leaders who pushed naps as a way to reduce public unrest, because you can't revolt while you're unconscious. Of course, not everyone appreciated the practice. The Stoics grumbled about wasted time. Wealthy landowners accused their staff of performative napping, which, frankly, feels like the most Roman complaint imaginable. But these objections didn't stop the cultural momentum. If anything, they helped solidify the idea that naps were more than personal, they were political. You stepped carefully through a shaded arcade and spot something that would baffle a modern tourist. A marble plaque reminding citizens of the sanctioned rest hour. It's not a joke. These were genuine civic markers. You imagine trying to install a sign in your city today that simply reads, "Please nap now, by order of the state." And this is where things begin to shift from amusing to fascinating. Because not only were naps expected, but there were also people, real government officials, tasked with making sure they happened. But we're not there yet. First, we settle into the world that made that possible. Take a breath. You're in the perfect city for an official nap. The stone streets may be hard, but the breeze is soft. The voices are quieting. The baked tiles above you radiate a subtle warmth. And all around, people are lying down, on benches, under trees, in doorways. Each one part of a culture that didn't just allow rest, it legislated it. You let your eyes drift toward the hazy horizon, where the Palatine Hill smolders in the sun. Somewhere behind it, bureaucrats are finishing their last scrolls before they, too, roll up their tunics and recline. You think of all the places in the world where rest is treated like weakness. And then you smile, because here, it's sacred. And with that sacred pause, your journey truly begins.
You stretch a little as you shift your weight on the warm stone bench, eyes heavy but ears still attuned to the distant burble of a fountain and the lazy drone of a lone cicada. The city is quiet now. Well, not silent. Rome is never truly silent, but slowed. As if someone turned down the volume knob of life just enough to let you hear your own breath. This is siesta time in the empire, and if you're still wandering the streets right now, someone might start giving you strange looks. You pass a narrow alley where even the stray dogs are curled up in the shade, tails twitching in dreams you'll never be allowed to interpret. A laundrywoman rests against a bundle of damp tunics, head tilted, one sandal dangling. A baker, still dusted in flour, is reclined on a sack of lentils. And around the corner, a group of toga-clad senators, yes, senators, lounges in a shaded portico, half asleep mid-sentence. It's not scandal, it's protocol. You've stumbled into a Rome where the meridiatio, the midday rest, isn't optional. It's a civic habit. Daily life is chopped in two, neatly cleaved down the middle by the sun. Morning is for action, afternoon is for stillness. There's a serenity to this routine, as if Rome is a massive machine that runs full tilt for 6 hours and then powers down, letting its cogs cool. You find yourself approaching the Forum Romanum, that grand plaza of politics and philosophy. Normally, it's the beating heart of the city, a swirling chaos of magistrates arguing, scribes transcribing, orators projecting from raised platforms while crowds jeer or cheer with equal enthusiasm. But not now. Right now, it's a museum piece in real time, everyone paused mid-act. It's not just the plebs or the rich who observe this pause. Even in the Basilicae, those vaulted civic buildings where legal matters are debated and commercial disputes resolved, everything halts. Judges recline, defendants take naps, even the pickpockets take a breather. Courtroom proceedings aren't simply postponed. They're interrupted, mid-sentence sometimes, for the sake of the sacred nap window. Historians still argue whether this was more about health or control. One camp sees it as a social equalizer. Everyone rests, regardless of class. Another theory suggests it allowed leaders to manage large populations by limiting opportunities for unrest during the day's hottest, most irritable hours. There's even a faint suggestion in some letters that the practice was originally tied to temple rituals, an idea scholars love to debate after 3 espressos and far too much parchment. You spot a sundial nearby, an ornate one, shaped like a curled dolphin, and the shadow is perfectly poised over the central line. That's not just coincidence. Romans used these tools not just to plan work, but to schedule not work. The moment that dolphin shadow bisected the noon mark, Rome collectively sighed and laid itself down. Here's where things get wonderfully peculiar. There were neighborhoods, especially in cities like austere Pompeii, where community nap zones were built into the design. Shaded loggias, public porticos with reclining stones, And in some particularly snooze-forward apartment buildings, insulated, there were shared nap rooms. Yes, think ancient co-napping spaces. No incense, no mood music, just an entire room of snoring, sandal-wearing Romans trying not to drool on each other. If you're wondering whether people took this seriously, oh, they did. There are fragments of poetry devoted to meditatio. Petronius once mocked those who napped too loud, while Martial wrote lovingly of midday rest, calling it a gift of the gods, which, when you think about it, might be the most relatable Roman sentiment ever penned. You turn a corner and catch sight of a large wooden sign posted at the entrance of a shop. The lettering is simple, scrawled with charcoal, CLVSVS. Meditatio, closed, nap time. Please return when I'm less horizontal. This isn't a joke. Shops closed in the middle of the day, and if they didn't, people noticed. In fact, in some districts, failing to close during meridies wasn't just frowned upon, it was reported. To whom, you ask? Well, that's for later. For now, let's just say someone was keeping track. It's easy to romanticize this. After all, a government-mandated nap window sounds like something dreamt up by a particularly enlightened therapist. But reality had its quirks. If you were a poor worker, say, a tanner or dock laborer, you might not get a proper space to lie down. Maybe you'd just lean against a barrel, using your folded tunic as a pillow. Maybe you'd nap in shifts, hoping the boss didn't yell. The privilege of luxurious naps belonged, as it so often does, to those with walls and courtyards and someone else doing their dishes. And still, despite inequalities, everyone paused. You take another step into the hush, and realize something: the noise hasn't disappeared. It's changed. The buzz of commerce has been replaced by the softer soundtrack of a city in neutral. Distant birds, a creaking cartwheel, the clink of a dropped amphora lid, someone humming, a breeze carries the scent of rosemary and warm fig leaves. You duck into a small garden, one of those private inner courtyards where upper-class Romans retreat during the hottest hours. There's a mosaic of Neptune under your feet, faded but beautiful, and a bench shaded by a pomegranate tree. You sit, maybe for a moment, maybe for longer. The air hums gently. You're starting to understand the rhythm of this place. A boy passes carrying a folded blanket and a basket of grapes. He's barefoot, focused. You wonder who he's delivering them to. Perhaps a senator trying to lull himself into sleep. Perhaps a merchant who naps better with snacks. And you wonder, too, if that senator knows that someone's job, somewhere, is to make sure he's actually asleep. That part's coming. For now, rest. You're halfway to nap-worthy yourself.
You're lounging in that shaded garden still, the mosaic tiles faintly warm under your fingers. The pomegranate tree's leaves rustle above you in a breeze so light you'd swear it was just your imagination brushing past. And then, just as your eyelids start to drift lower, you hear it. Footsteps, not hurried, not clumsy. Purposeful, measured, the kind of walk that says, I have a job to do, but I'm not about to sweat doing it. A man in a short tunic passes by the garden's edge, holding a stylus and a wax tablet. His eyes scan the windows, the doorways, the shaded courtyards like this one. You think at first he might be a census clerk or a nosy poet. But no, he's something rarer, an official nap inspector. Yes, really, because in ancient Rome, when rest became routine, enforcement soon followed. What started as custom turned into expectation, and expectation, well, Rome loved turning expectations into offices. So emerged the Meditationes Custodes, a loose but very real network of civic officials. Household stewards, and sometimes even religious functionaries who were tasked with keeping nap time sacred. Historians still argue whether these so-called nap inspectors were always official state roles or sometimes private household staff. The Latin terminology is murky. Some sources refer to them in joking tones, suggesting a blend of real enforcement and satire. Others, especially from rural estates, treat their presence as part of everyday life, like a cook or a gatekeeper. Either way, if you weren't napping when you were supposed to, someone noticed. You imagine lying in a grand villa, eyes wide open, just pretending to sleep. the curtains drawn, your sandals neatly stacked beside your couch. Then, squeak, comes the soft creak of a sandal outside the doorway. The inspector peeks in, maybe raises an eyebrow, maybe just scribbles something on his wax tablet and moves on. But you know the implication, your name might be noted. Not fined, necessarily, but judged. And Roman society ran on judgment. Nap inspectors, especially in urban centers, were more symbolic than punitive. They didn't drag you off to prison if you skipped a siesta. But they were tasked with preserving social harmony. If a shopkeeper kept his stall open after Merides, it disrupted the street's quiet. If a household made too much noise, it offended neighbors. If a government official ignored nap time entirely, well, that could suggest arrogance. Even dissent. Sleep was unity. Not sleeping was chaos. And besides, the Romans believed naps weren't just healthy. They were moral. Philosophers like Seneca and Pliny the Elder wrote about the proper alignment of the body and mind. Sleep during Merides was a moment to recharge not just your limbs, but your virtue. Skipping your nap meant you were possibly out of balance, physically or spiritually. It meant your humors might be off. And nobody wanted their humors unbalanced in a city that regularly tried to treat fevers with cabbage and volcanic ash. A fringe theory, beloved by some academics who clearly spend too much time in dusty libraries, suggests that dream surveillance played a role here. Some temples, especially those connected to Asclepius, the god of healing, encouraged dreams as diagnostics. Priests might ask citizens to nap and report what they saw. A peaceful dream meant spiritual harmony. A nightmare could mean divine disapproval. So in some contexts, people weren't just expected to nap, they were expected to report back afterward. Ancient dream journaling, Roman style. Of course, most nap inspectors weren't spiritual figures. On large estates, they were usually trusted senior slaves, responsible for household order. In cities, they might be municipal staff tasked with recording whether a district complied with rest hour codes. That's right, codes. Some preserved building contracts mention midday noise ordinances, suggesting that new constructions had to be designed with nap time silence in mind. You try to picture your own apartment being judged by a Roman inspector. Ah yes, I see you've installed 2 fans and blackout curtains. Acceptable. But do you own a cat? Very disruptive. We'll be back. There's even a Roman legal term, intervalla quietus, which roughly means intervals of quiet, often referenced in property disputes. Did your neighbor's mosaic workshop violate naptime harmony? You could take it to court. Assuming the court was open, of course. Which it wouldn't be. Because of naptime, you leave the garden, walking slowly past rows of ivy-covered columns. A taberna, a sort of Roman cafe, is shuttered, a chalk sign hung crookedly from its doorway. Radio post MERIDIEM. I return after the nap. You can still smell cumin and stale wine drifting from under the door. Someone inside coughs, shifts, then falls silent again. The inspector you saw earlier has stopped under a tree, recording something. He yawns, rubs his eyes, and without fanfare, he lies down right there beneath the branches and joins the sleepers. Inspector or not, he's still a Roman. Not everyone liked these enforcers. Some citizens saw them as nosy meddlers. In upper-class satirical poetry, they're occasionally mocked, called the gods of sloth or dreamtime taxmen. One body play even included a character who tried to bribe a nap inspector with a roasted fig to let his household keep rehearsing a musical during rest hour. The inspector took the fig, then told them to stop playing anyway. But most people didn't mind the presence of these nap watchers. In fact, they found it comforting. In a city that could be loud, stressful, unpredictable, it was nice to know someone was keeping the sacred silence intact. That the nap was being defended. Because for all its grandeur, its conquests, its ego, the Roman world also understood the value of a good pause. You lie back again, eyes half-lidded, and listen to the rustle of tunics, the gentle exhale of 100 soft snores drifting through open windows. A peace secured not just by swords or laws, but by naps. You're still reclined beneath that imaginary pomegranate tree, but now, let's ease deeper into the real genius of Roman rest culture, the architecture of napping. Because if you're going to insist an entire civilization slows down for a few hours each day, you'd better give it the infrastructure to do so. And Rome? Well, Rome rarely did anything halfway. Take a walk with me now, down a shaded vicus, a Roman street that's neither alley nor avenue. The stones are warm but not searing, and the air is heavy with the scent of baked bread and crushed laurel leaves. On either side, tall apartment buildings called insulae rise like mismatched Lego stacks. From the outside, they look crammed and chaotic, with balconies jutting at odd angles and laundry waving from windows. But inside? That's where the magic happens. Midday quiet falls like a curtain, and the whole structure seems to exhale. You walk past an open doorway and glance into a small cenoculum, a top floor unit. A narrow room, low ceiling, and just enough space for a mat, a jug of water, and, most importantly, a window that catches the afternoon breeze. This humble space is a masterpiece of passive cooling. Thick walls trap the cool of morning and release it slowly, like a whisper, as the sun rises. Slatted shutters, angled just so, let in light without heat. Historians still argue whether these upper floors were more desirable for their airflow or more dangerous because of fire risk. Either way, many Romans happily climbed 5 flights of rickety stairs just to collapse into a patch of shade, all to obey the sacred clock of the day. But architecture wasn't just functional, it was spiritual. Villas in the countryside were often built around a central courtyard called an atrium, open to the sky and ringed with columns. During siesta, this became nap central. Picture marble floors swept clean, a bubbling fountain in the middle, and couches set in the shade like drowsy chess pieces. The wealthy reclined in togas, the household staff in tunics, and the household cats wherever they pleased. You feel yourself moving through one of these villas now, the kind only senators or soap magnates could afford. The air is cool, filtered through linen curtains soaked in rosewater. Somewhere, a flute plays, not a performance, just idle practice from someone too lazy to nap but too polite to make noise. A scribe is passed out over his wax tablet. A parrot, chained politely to a perch, mutters Latin phrases learned from a previous owner. And then, there it is, the cubicula diurna. The daytime bedroom. Yes, the Romans had separate sleeping spaces for naps. These weren't your nighttime quarters filled with privacy and dreams of empire. These were cozy, nap-sized dens, sometimes windowless, always quiet, and often located near baths or gardens. Some scholars believe they were soundproofed with layered drapery or woven reeds. Others think their silence came from thick stone walls and location, tucked away from the more bustling parts of the villa. In poorer homes, the nap spaces were improvised. A corner behind a curtain, a storage room with a mat, a rooftop if it wasn't too hot. But whether you were a senator or a sandal seller, you found your spot. The city's design encouraged it. Shade was built in, courtyards invited stillness. Columns weren't just decorative, they created pockets of air movement, little wind tunnels where rest felt possible. And if you were out and about, far from home at the noon hour, Rome had you covered there. Too, literally. The porticus, long covered walkways supported by colonnades, ran through much of the city. During peak heat, they transformed into public nap zones. Citizens would sprawl out on benches, cloaks over their faces, while pigeons strutted nearby like unimpressed spectators. Occasionally, a boy would come by selling chilled wine or honey cakes, because what's a nap without a snack? But here's a lovely, weird detail. Certain bathhouses had nap rooms built in. Yes, after a good scrub and soak in the caldarium, you could pad softly into a dark, tiled chamber designed just for dozing. Warmed by the hypocaust heating system below the floors, these rooms were like ancient spa lounges. A faint eucalyptus scent from oil lamps, quiet echoes, the occasional polite snore. You imagine lying on a stone bench, towel under your head, water trickling somewhere out of sight. Not exactly plush, but deeply, deeply nap-worthy. There's evidence from Pompeii that shop fronts and workshops sometimes included a tiny private chamber in the back, not for tools or grain storage. But for rest, a stone bench, a jug of water, sometimes even a scratched poem about dreams or lovers on the plaster wall. In these spaces, the physical world paused to let the internal one drift. But as much as Romans loved their architecture, they also embraced the art of crafting stillness. Nap-friendly clothes helped. Loose tunics, soft sandals, portable cushions, often filled with goose down or straw, depending on your tax bracket. One clever Roman writer even recommends keeping a jar of lavender water near your face to lure the mind downward. You consider this. You think about the Romans inventing aromatherapy while you can barely remember where you left your sleep mask. You pass a baker's shop with a thatched roof angled perfectly to cast a shadow across a wooden bench. The baker himself, flour-streaked, heavy-lidded, is curled up next to a basket of still warm loaves. You catch the faint crunch of crust as he shifts, half asleep and definitely dreaming of carbs. Even the temples, those stone-clad monuments to gods and grandeur, weren't immune. Priests observed nap times with as much discipline as prayer schedules. Certain cults believed the gods were more likely to whisper truths during midday rest. A sleepy sacrifice might just win divine favor, or at least a decent dream involving golden geese and overflowing wine amphorae. And of course, we can't skip the animals. Cats were respected as expert nappers, but dogs too had a role to play. Some households trained their pups to nap on cue, curled beside their master's sandals, so that even the snores matched in tempo. One Roman poet mourned the death of his dog by writing, "He never missed the hour of stillness, and kept my feet warm with purpose." You pause, breathing in the deep peace of a city designed, physically, philosophically, architecturally, to help people slow down. It's not laziness, it's design, intentional rest, built-in exhale. You can almost hear the buildings themselves sighing in sleep. So maybe tonight, when you lie in your bed and pull your blanket up to your chin, you'll remember the cubicula diurna, the sun-dappled courtyards, the cooling breeze of a shaded porticus. And you'll think, these ancient people? They knew what they were doing. The soft hush of nap time still clings to your clothes as you meander out of that shaded villa, the image of the cubicula diurna lingering like the afterglow of a good stretch. But today's Roman nap culture didn't just survive because of architecture or quiet courtyards. It thrived thanks to one of Rome's most sacred traditions, the daily schedule. You see, to understand why a whole civilization practically shut down for a siesta every day, you've got to look at how the Roman day was sliced up. And let's be honest, it wasn't exactly intuitive. The Romans didn't use standardized time the way we do. No clocks ticking off minutes with robotic precision. Instead, they divided daylight into 12 segments, called horae, from sunrise to sunset. Which means that in winter, an hour might be as short as 45 minutes, and in summer, it might stretch to 75. Yes, Roman hours were flexible. You could try telling a Roman you're 5 minutes late, but they'd likely stare at the sun and say, still hora sexta, no rush. It was this sixth hour, hora sexta, around midday, when everything slowed. This was the nap hour, the sacred pause, the very heartbeat of Roman daily life. You're walking through the Forum now, and even the bustling center of civic and political activity feels like it's exhaling. Stalls are draped with cloth, magistrates' chairs sit empty in front of silent basilicas, and somewhere, someone is ringing a bell. Not for business, but to signal closing time. Not a dramatic clang, more of a gentle ding, like a lullaby with good manners. Shops closed, courts recessed, senators went home. Even those famous Roman bathhouses, the ones filled with debate, gossip, and questionable health remedies, quieted for the siesta. Because hora sexta wasn't just a nap. It was almost a mini holiday, baked into every single day. This rhythm wasn't optional, especially not if you wanted to be taken seriously. Imagine trying to schedule a debate about tax reform during the nap hour. You'd be laughed out of the curia. Or worse, forced to stay awake alone, which might have been the ultimate Roman punishment. And here's the funny part, even military schedules respected the siesta. Roman legions were famously strict. Marching formations, rigid discipline, polished sandals, But when the sun hit its apex, commanders often called for rest. Tents were pitched in perfect grids, and soldiers, yes, even grizzled centurions with scars and scary eyebrows, tucked into brief naps. Leather armor off, helmets rolled gently to one side as makeshift pillows. Why? Because a drowsy legionary was a bad legionary. And because a cranky centurion yelling at birds during a battle probably didn't help morale. Historians still argue whether this military nap time was uniform across all provinces or adapted based on climate. After all, napping in rainy Britannia wasn't the same as napping in sun-baked Cappadocia. Some inscriptions suggest legates encouraged longer rest periods in warmer regions. Others imply that in colder provinces, rest looked more like huddling and cursing the wind. Back in the city, if you weren't napping during hora sexta, you'd stand out. Children were shushed. Chariots avoided main roads. Even temples dimmed their offerings. Lamps snuffed. Incense left to smolder quietly. You imagine a sleepy priest trying to chant a hymn, yawning halfway through a line to Jupiter, and no one daring to correct him. But like any cultural tradition, the siesta had its critics. Some Roman philosophers, usually the more uptight Stoics, grumbled about excessive softness. They believed constant naps weakened the will, made the body lazy. One particularly crabby senator named Cato the Elder famously bragged that he never napped, drank cold water, and hated poetry. You can imagine the fun at his dinner parties. Still, even the Stoics admitted that meridies, midday, marked the natural point of reflection. Whether you closed your eyes or just stared into a cup of watered-down wine. The message was the same: pause, digest, breathe. But let's not pretend everyone napped with elegance. Roman graffiti, yes, it wasn't all vulgar doodles, includes hilarious complaints about neighbors snoring too loud, or lazy coworkers pretending to sleep so they could avoid chores. One scratched wall in Ostia reads, "Marcus naps like a pig and smells worse," which feels like the ancient version of a passive-aggressive roommate note. Even Roman poets got in on the nap humor. Horace, that old softy, wrote lovingly about the joy of sprawling under a fig tree, drunk on shade and wine, while everyone else did important things. Juvenal, more grumpy than sleepy, mocked rich patricians for turning every hour into nap hour. And Martial, Rome's king of witty insults, once said, "If only your words slept as well as your mouth does after lunch." And of course, naps came with rituals. Many Romans took a light prandium, lunch, before their rest. Bread, olives, cheese, maybe a smear of fish paste or a few dates. Nothing too heavy. The goal wasn't food coma, just a gentle coast into sleep. Afterwards, some applied scented oils, lay on lectus, day beds, and used light linens or woolen throws, depending on the season. If you had a slave to fan you, even better. If you had two, well, now you were just showing off. You cross another courtyard, this one belonging to a mid-level bureaucrat, someone who probably signed scrolls for 8 hours before his ink ran out and he collapsed in a heap. He's there now, in a half-shaded room, draped across a couch with his toga askew and his sandals still on. You hear a soft whistle through his nose. He dreams of balanced ledgers and quieter geese. And so you begin to understand, the nap wasn't an interruption. It was the hinge of the day. The breath before the next sentence. The comma in the Roman rhythm. Because after hora sexta, life picked back up. The forum reopened. Dinner plans were made. Baths filled again. But the siesta remained, glowing at the center like a secret sun. A daily moment when emperors and slaves, soldiers and scribes, could all close their eyes under the same sky. And maybe that's the real power of the Roman nap. Not just that it refreshed the body, but that for 1 hour each day, it made everyone equal. The light is shifting now, honeyed and warm, as you leave the quiet hum of the nap hour behind and drift into the realm of those who made rest their business, quite literally. Because in ancient Rome, the siesta wasn't just a personal habit. It was part of a booming social expectation, and yes, there were actual people tasked with keeping it in line. Welcome to the oddly relaxing world of nap inspectors. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about a Roman official marching around with a clipboard and whispering shish at noisy blacksmiths. The historical record here is patchy, and historians still argue whether the role of nap inspector was ever formalized with a title, or if it was more of a social or religious responsibility, gently baked into Roman civic life. But evidence points to certain figures, especially in temples, villas, and the military, who essentially functioned as guardians of the peace during rest hours. Let's take a little detour into the kinds of roles these inspectors may have embodied. You're now shadowing a sleepy-eyed Aedetuas, a temple caretaker in a small suburban shrine to Mercury. He walks barefoot, carries a bundle of incense, and one of his many jobs, aside from feeding pigeons and sweeping up wax drippings, is ensuring that the sacred calm of the nap hour isn't broken. That means gently shooing away gossiping merchants, silencing squeaky altar doors, and occasionally calming down an overzealous goat. Imagine being spiritually responsible for maintaining nap-time silence. It's like being both a monk and a noise-canceling headphone. Then there are household slaves assigned to nap management. Yes, this was a real thing. In upper-class Roman homes, where the midday rest was a symbol of refined living, certain slaves were tasked with preparing the sleeping area. They'd fluff cushions, sprinkle calming scents, like crushed lavender or myrrh, and patrol the perimeters to keep disturbances at bay. One satirical poem even complains about a dozing patrician servant who snored louder than the master, which, honestly, feels like a staffing issue. Outside of temples and villas, it gets more interesting. You wander now into a military encampment, neatly ordered, as always, and find that the centurions have appointed a junior officer to keep watch over the siesta. No drilling, no shouting, no sharpening of swords allowed within earshot. This officer, often young and ambitious, takes his duty far too seriously. He glares at a yawning soldier trying to hum himself to sleep and wags a stern finger. Because in a world where morale is everything, the nap hour is not to be trifled with. Public buildings, too, had informal nap wardens. Janitors, doormen, even scribes who found themselves the reluctant custodians of peace during the city's daily exhale. Graffiti from Pompeii jokes about a man who snuck past the nap watcher to steal figs, which sounds both petty and oddly cinematic. But the most surprising part? Rome had laws, actual written laws, about noise regulation during certain hours of the day, and many of these aligned perfectly with the traditional siesta. Lex Julia Municipalis, a municipal law from Julius Caesar's time, included stipulations on when street traffic and vendors were allowed to operate. While it doesn't say thou shalt nap, it certainly makes clear that public noise was restricted at specific times. Scholars argue this was less about sleep and more about civic order, but you know how overlapping motives go. Maybe it was both. The legal culture around rest extended even further. Courts didn't hold sessions during hora sexta. That meant no trials, no deliberations, no impassioned speeches from toga-clad lawyers waving scrolls like dramatic fans. If you had a dispute, say, over a borrowed amphora or runaway goose, you'd have to wait until the afternoon to air your grievances. Justice might be blind, but it also respected nap time. There's also evidence that some Roman apartment complexes, or insulae, had house rules. Not just don't leave fish in the hallway or keep your sandals on. We're talking rules about maintaining quiet during midday. Ancient lease documents from Ostia mention quiet hours enforced by landlords or building managers. You picture an irritable, balding man on the second floor who bangs his walking stick on the ceiling if you so much as sneeze during hora sexta. And then, there's religion. Several Roman cults believed that midday was a spiritually vulnerable time. The boundary between waking and sleeping was seen as a thin veil, one that could invite dreams, omens, or even minor gods. Priests of Apollo and members of certain mystery cults performed quiet rituals around this time, hoping to attract dreams sent by the divine. Whether these were truly cosmic visions or just fig-induced hallucinations is anyone's guess. So, you see, nap inspector wasn't necessarily a singular role, but more of a collective duty, passed from priest to porter, centurion to servant. an unspoken agreement that rest had sacred weight. It was cultural glue, holding together the noise of Roman ambition with the silence of Roman reflection. Even comedy troupes of the time, yes, Romans loved a good stage gag, would insert nap jokes into their performances. One popular sketch involved a mock nap tribunal, where citizens could file complaints about being disturbed during rest. The judge, played by an actor with a pillow strapped to his back, would mumble a verdict between yawns and call for immediate silence or exile to a louder neighborhood. And who could forget the scroll keepers of the Senate? These poor souls worked long hours copying speeches and laws, but during siesta, they were strictly off duty. In fact, the word scriba became slang in some circles for someone who disappeared halfway through the day. He pulled a scriba meant he bailed to nap. You imagine them curled under piles of parchment, dreaming of inkless days. Of course, as with everything in Rome, not everyone took the nap rules seriously. Some younger Romans, especially the rich and rebellious, mocked the tradition. They held midday feasts, played noisy dice games, and even rode through town just to provoke the sleepy masses. One nobleman, known only from a satire by Petronius, supposedly rode a cart filled with noisy parrots through the marketplace during siesta for sport. Unsurprisingly, he was not invited to many dinner parties. Still, the culture held firm. Whether enforced by temple keepers, household servants, municipal officials, or overzealous neighbors, the nap hour was protected like a sacred ritual. You weren't just resting, you were partaking in an unspoken civic pact. 1 hour of peace, earned by 1,000 voices choosing not to shout. And honestly, as you glide past another sleeping courtyard, where the breeze gently moves a curtain and a pigeon coos somewhere in the rafters, you can't help but think they were onto something. You leave behind the sleepy courtyards and carefully patrolled nap zones of the city, and now you're floating into the private world of Roman bedrooms, cubicula, where the art of napping took its most delicate and, frankly, theatrical form. Because if there's one thing ancient Romans knew how to do, it was turning even something as universal as a nap into an occasion. In elite households, the midday nap wasn't just a quick snooze, it was a performance, staged with cushions, fragrances, attendants, and carefully calculated lighting. The wealthy Roman didn't so much fall asleep as descend into rest, like an emperor being lowered onto a velvet cloud. Your feet sink into a cool marble floor as you enter one of these lavish rooms. The walls are painted in deep reds and soft golds, the kind of palette that's meant to make you feel halfway to dreamland already. A single shaft of sunlight filters through a linen curtain, casting patterns that seem to shimmer gently on the floor. The air smells of crushed rose petals and, oddly, warmed beeswax, left over from the polished candlesticks that stand on every surface like sleepy little sentinels. And in the center of it all, a low couch or lectus, draped in dyed wool throws and linen sheets, hand-washed by someone whose entire job description is person who understands thread counts. You lie down, not because you're tired, but because the room suggests that you should be. Now, lest you think this was only for the elite, even modest Roman homes had their own versions of a cubiculum. Sometimes it was just a curtained-off nook near the hearth, or a shaded spot on the roof with a straw mat and a little breeze. But the desire for comfort and privacy? Universal. Even the humblest baker in Trastevere would scowl at a midday customer knocking too loudly. Inside the wealthy homes, the nap was facilitated by a range of characters who orbit the sleeper like attendants around a minor deity. One slave might be tasked with selecting the right sleeping fragrance, perhaps nard, imported from India, or a blend of fennel and mint to soothe digestion. Another might lightly tap a tiny bell outside the door to warn other servants that the master is resting. You, of course, have your own special servant. Let's call him Marcus Minor, whose only job is to gently wave a palm fan at your feet so they don't get too warm. And this isn't even touching the world of nap fashion. That's right, wealthy Romans had specific garments they wore only during rest, soft tunics made of finely woven cotton, sometimes dyed pale blue or green because those colors were believed to cool the body. The Emperor Hadrian reportedly had resting robes that were only brought out after lunch, and his physician warned against tight sandals during sleep, which, honestly, is advice we can all get behind. You might be wondering, what did people dream about during these elaborate naps? Well, Romans believed dreams were messages from the gods, or at least from one's personal genius, the spiritual double that hovered nearby like an invisible, whispering intern. Dream interpreters were common among the wealthy, and many kept journals or scrolls dedicated entirely to recording their midday visions. In fact, historians still argue whether the popularity of the nap was driven as much by a desire for divine insight as it was by genuine fatigue. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once wrote that he preferred the afternoon nap because his dreams were less cluttered by morning anxieties, which sounds suspiciously like ancient wellness advice. Meanwhile, Pliny the Elder, who seems to have had an opinion on everything, claimed that naps after seafood produced the most vivid visions. This is either dream science or indigestion, possibly both. And now, imagine the routines of Roman women during this time. While their lives were often tightly structured by domestic duties, the nap hour offered a rare window for solitude. Wealthy women might retreat to their own cubicula, separate from their husbands, to read poetry, burn incense, and, if the gossip scrolls are to be believed, concoct minor schemes involving dinner seating arrangements or which cousin needed to be uninvited from the Saturnalia banquet. Some even used special cooling stones, flat pieces of alabaster or polished marble placed under the neck, to counteract the summer heat. It's like an ancient version of a cooling pillow, except it probably weighed 5 pounds and cost half your dowry. Meanwhile, children were encouraged to rest too. But anyone who has ever tried to make a Roman toddler nap knows it's not a perfect system. One mosaic from a villa near Naples shows a very realistic scene: a nursemaid chasing a screaming child with a stuffed goose while another child pretends to sleep, peeking one eye open to make sure the coast is clear. Kids, it seems, have always been kids. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of a private nap chamber. Workers in shops, laborers at the docks, scribes at the forum, all had to be a little more creative. Many would duck into shaded archways or lie on a piece of cloth rolled out behind a market stall. One charming inscription in Pompeii reads, "Here slept Marcus the potter, who made dreams from clay," etched on the side of what was probably his napping spot. It's both poetic and deeply practical. Also, pretty on brand for a man who spent his life shaping jars. But no matter your status, the rhythm was clear: eat modestly, retreat to quiet, let the body recharge. And the most devoted adherents? They claimed that the quality of your nap revealed your character. A restless sleeper was thought to be morally agitated. Someone who could nap instantly and deeply, probably virtuous, or extremely boring. Both were good outcomes in Rome. So, as you lie on your imaginary lectus, wrapped in airy linen, with Marcus Minor diligently fanning your toes and someone in the next room softly reciting Virgil to a half-asleep tortoise, you start to realize, this wasn't just a culture that allowed for naps. It was a civilization that took sleep personally, tenderly, artistically. And now, it's time to roll over, let that scented breeze drift past your cheek, and allow the next part of our journey to arrive as slowly as a dream floating up from a silver bowl of olives. Your eyes flutter open, only to realize you never really left the dream. The room hasn't changed, soft marble, lazy sunbeams, but now you're wandering out of the cubiculum, down a gently echoing corridor, and into the heart of public life once again. It's time to explore where the nap hour collided with one of the most iconic Roman spaces, the public baths. Yes, it turns out the Romans weren't content to simply nap in silence. They needed ambiance, and sometimes, they needed hot water, steam, and the kind of soft gossip that flows better when everyone's wrapped in towels. The Roman thermae were much more than just hygiene stations. They were social theaters, places to conduct business, settle arguments, play board games, and, crucially, to relax. And nestled into that relaxation? The post-bath nap, a tradition embraced by patricians and plebeians alike. You pad softly into a typical thermae, say, the Grand Baths of Caracalla. Towering ceilings, mosaics depicting lazy sea gods, and the ever-present murmur of people trying very hard to sound nonchalant while negotiating trade deals with one leg in a hot tub. The journey begins in the tepidarium, the warm room. Think of it as a Roman sauna, except decorated with bronze mirrors and filled with the scent of warmed oils. Here, bathers would recline, gossip, and begin the gentle transition from talking about tax grain quotas to mildly dozing off while someone rubs your back with olive paste. Next came the caldarium, the hot room, steam curling like dragon's breath from the pools. Most didn't nap here directly, but they prepared the body for sleep by relaxing every muscle, every worry, every trace of toga-induced stiffness. The Romans knew a steamed limb was a sleepy limb. Finally, they drift into the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool. A shocking, but invigorating, jolt before retreating to the districtarium, where slaves or attendants scraped off oil and sweat with a strigil. It sounds aggressive, but done right, it was almost meditative. And then, the final step, the nap. In most major baths, there were designated rest areas, wide, shaded courtyards or alcoves with low couches where bathers could recline and doze. Some even came with light musical entertainment, lyre players, flute duos, or the occasional bard mumbling old war poems under their breath. The air was thick with perfume, drifting from wall-mounted diffusers filled with frankincense or crushed iris root. This was communal rest at its finest. You didn't just close your eyes, you became part of a larger, synchronized exhale. The entire city pulsed with this rhythm: bathe, steam, nap, repeat. One historian joked that a Roman's greatest stress was choosing which bathhouse to be unconscious in. And not all bath naps were indulgent. For the elderly, injured, or recovering, these baths served as real therapy. Roman physicians recommended post-bath naps as a way to rebalance the humors. The logic went, cleanse the skin, warm the body, shock it with cold, then let it lie very, very still. It was the ancient version of detox and chill. And, believe it or not, some bathhouses even had their own in-house doctors. They'd watch over you, offer warm barley water, and insist you rest at least until the flute player finishes his fourth stanza. Historians still argue whether some bathhouses charged for nap access. Some scroll fragments suggest wealthier citizens could reserve shaded couches in advance. Others claim the best nap spots were claimed through social maneuvering: arrive early, tip your masseur, and don't hog the lyre player. Children, too, were part of the scene. In the less formal neighborhood baths, you'd often find kids splashing loudly until a nap signal was given. Usually a bell, clap, or the universal Roman sound of a disapproving mother clearing her throat. Then, like tiny citizens in training, they'd retreat to woven mats laid out along the wall, fidgeting until they fell asleep. You may be wondering, what about women? While men and women often bathed at different times, or in separate facilities altogether, women's bathhouses had similar nap traditions. But their nap spaces often doubled as gossip zones, where secrets were whispered, poems were read aloud, and dreams were interpreted half-seriously while someone braided your hair. One letter from a Roman matron named Domitia describes how she pretended to sleep so the widow Flavia would stop asking when I'll remarry. A solid move, Domitia. Of course, not everyone embraced the bath nap culture. Stoics like Cato the Elder scoffed at the idea, claiming it softened the Roman soul. He famously bathed in cold water only, took no naps, and probably didn't get invited to many toga parties. But even he couldn't ignore the growing popularity of rest as routine. There were also, as you might expect, rules. You couldn't snore too loudly. No talking in rest areas. Definitely no dice games during nap time. One tablet found near a bathhouse in Ostia records a fine for disrupting sacred rest with a lyre solo of offensive tempo. So, apparently, speed lyre was a thing, and a banned one, at that. And for those who couldn't afford the grand baths, there were smaller, local establishments, the Roman equivalent of a neighborhood spa. These places might not have had gold mosaics or imported oils, but they had one thing in abundance: shade. Cool corners, a bench under a fig tree where you could lean back, stretch your toes, and fall asleep listening to distant conversation and birds. So, here you are. reclined on a stone couch that's just warm enough. The scent of basil wafting from somewhere unseen, and a faint plink-plink of a water feature trickling nearby. Your muscles sigh, your eyelids flutter. The world is quiet but alive, like the pause between waves on a calm Roman shore. And for a moment, you're not just napping. You're participating in a cultural ritual. A society that built aqueducts, conquered empires, and still knew the supreme value of lying very still with a belly full of figs. You drift upward again, rising gently from the tiled warmth of the bathhouse courtyard, and this time, your feet land softly on a Roman road. The stones beneath you are warm from the sun, and all around is the steady clop of hooves, the distant rattle of a merchant's cart, and the low murmur of midday Rome slowing to its nap-time crawl. Because now, it's time to examine a peculiar piece of Roman infrastructure, not the temples or aqueducts, but the sleep-friendly urban planning that made dozing downright civic. Let's start with the streets themselves. During the Roman hora sexta, that's high noon to early afternoon, the city's pace shifted. Not stopped entirely, mind you, but adjusted. And that shift was intentional, designed, and enforced by laws, customs, and occasionally a stern man with a scroll and a very official feather quill. You walk along the Via Appia and notice something subtle. The roar of morning traffic, the traders shouting, the donkey brays, the clatter of wagon wheels, has ebbed into something more like background music. That's because Roman law restricted certain kinds of noise and movement during rest hours. Construction halted. Public announcements were delayed. Even the heralds, who usually shouted proclamations in the forum, were asked to soften their delivery. Imagine a town crier whispering the imperial grain tax update. Soothing, no? Shops, too, responded to the sacred nap hour. Most closed or dimmed their entrances. Artisans hung small signs outside, often with hand-carved eyes that drooped or closed entirely. Bakers, potters, even the more organized thieves, everyone respected the pause. This wasn't laziness, it was hygiene, rhythm. Rome had no air conditioning, and the afternoon heat could turn ambition into sunstroke with stunning efficiency. That's where city planners stepped in. Historians still argue whether the grid design of certain Roman cities was partially engineered to maximize airflow during peak heat hours. But what's not debated is that shaded arcades, covered porticos, and colonnaded walkways weren't just stylish, they were practical. These features allowed for sleepy strollers to wander without sunburn, and for businesses to sneak in quick naps behind their stalls. And then there were the nap zones, unofficial but universally acknowledged. In Rome, Alexandria, and even far-off Londinium, public benches, temple steps, and shaded fountains became makeshift nap arenas. The best spots were claimed early and jealously guarded. There's one record from the Roman poet Martial where he complains that a fishmonger snored through the noon hour upon my favorite fountain seat. A complaint that feels shockingly modern. For the truly devoted napper, there was an elite set of tools, portable cushions, pulvini, folding stools, or even small parasols called umbelli used not for rain, but to cast a perfect circle of shade over one's face during repose. Some Romans, naturally, took it a step further, bringing along servants to fan them or gently wake them after exactly 1 hour, ensuring no dreams turned into disorientation. Now, let's talk about the napping inspectors again, our beloved inspectors quieti. These weren't just indoor figures. In the wealthier districts of Rome, they wandered public rest areas during siesta hours, ensuring tranquility was respected. If someone chatted too loudly near a known nap bench or started tuning their lyre too enthusiastically on temple steps, a nap inspector could intervene with a polite, but firm, warning. There's even mention of fines. One humorous inscription outside a public square in Ephesus reads, "Disturb not the sleepers, lest you be fined a loaf and a lecture." Whether that's literal or just a very ancient dad joke, the message was clear: silence is golden, especially between the hours of 12 and 3. Of course, not all Romans loved this quiet period. Businessmen sometimes grumbled that the nap hour stalled commerce. "Profit sleeps when the city sleeps," said one scroll scribbler with particularly twitchy handwriting. But others saw the wisdom. Napping wasn't a sign of laziness, it was a symbol of self-mastery. Of listening to the body, obeying nature, and avoiding heat rash. Very stoic, in its way. Let's now glide into one of Rome's busier marketplaces, say, the Forum Boarium, near the Tiber River. Early morning? Chaos. Animals, shouting, coin clinks. But by midday, even the oxen look drowsy. Sellers lean against marble columns, heads drooping. One snores into a pile of lentils. Another fans her face with a cabbage leaf. A group of older men lounge on crates, pretending to debate the price of garum, but really just waiting for the sun to move on. And here's where a fun little cultural quirk arises. Romans had a concept called otium, roughly, leisure or free time. But it wasn't laziness. Otium was productive rest. It was the mental state that allowed you to read poetry, reflect on life, maybe scribble out a few lines of bad epic verse that no one would ever read. Napping, especially in a shaded public space, fell squarely into this idea. You weren't just lying down. You were participating in the rhythm of Rome. One senator, according to legend, held his most important meetings during nap hour. He'd lie on a low couch in his garden atrium and invite guests to recline beside him. They'd speak softly, shaded by olive trees, with nothing but the gentle splash of a nearby fountain and the sleepy buzz of bees in the background. Decisions were made, policies born, all while horizontal. Even the urban animals respected the pause. Cats curled in pottery kilns. Dogs sprawled beneath carts. Birds, overwhelmed by heat and boredom, flapped less. A midday nap wasn't a human indulgence. It was a multi-species agreement. Now, you continue wandering down a quieter street, lined with fig trees and laundry lines. You pass by a baker's doorway and see him slouched in a stool, flour still on his forearms, head resting on a sack of wheat. Behind him, a half-finished loaf sits abandoned on the table, mid-rise. He'll return to it soon, energized by 20 minutes of perfect stillness. And in this way, the entire city recharges. Not with caffeine, but with silence, with softness, with a shared understanding that the world spins better when you lie down for a bit and let the sun pass over. So you find your own bench. It's warm but shaded. A gentle breeze lifts a curl of your hair. The muffled sound of someone whistling a lullaby carries from a distant balcony. You lean back, close your eyes, and nap like a Roman, proudly, publicly, and with the contented knowledge that in this city, rest isn't weakness. It's wisdom. You wake slowly this time, as if your consciousness is politely knocking before entering. The sounds of the Roman street are still hushed, the light golden and forgiving, but now you're indoors again. This time, in the cozy sprawl of a modest Roman townhouse, or domus. Because, let's face it, not everyone napped in a marble atrium or sprawling public bath. Most Romans, like you in this moment, had to find their rest within the humble, cluttered rhythm of home. Step gently. Your sandals brush over a floor mosaic featuring a snoozing panther. Ironically accurate for what's about to happen. The domus is quiet, save for the creak of a wooden shutter and the distant tinkle of a neighbor's wind chime. And here's where you learn one of the softest truths of ancient life. Private napping was an art form all its own. The layout of a Roman home was designed, quite sneakily, for midday rest. Even modest houses had a small central courtyard, the atrium, with a skylight above and rooms arranged around it like petals around a daisy. Light came in, yes, but so did breezes. This natural ventilation meant the cubiculum, or bedroom, remained surprisingly cool even when the city baked outside. And if you were wealthy, you had a triclinium, or dining room, where afternoon meals often blurred into drowsy digestive dozing on long couches. It's here, in the lull between bites of honeyed cheese and half-finished scroll readings, that the private nap bloomed. One scroll fragment, believed to be from a Roman schoolteacher, describes his daily routine in precise detail. Rise at dawn, teach loudly until noon, lunch at home, then a nap shorter than Cicero's preface, but longer than a student's attention span. You can feel his exhaustion, also his pride. Napping was a reward, but it was earned. Now you lie down on one such couch. It's low, made of polished wood with a cushion that's been fluffed unevenly by generations of elbows. A thin linen sheet covers you. Romans didn't use thick blankets for siesta, they preferred something breathable. Beside you, a ceramic cup of lukewarm wine rests on a table. Not for getting drunk, just for slowing down the mind, like ancient melatonin. Nearby, someone else is already dozing. Maybe it's a spouse, a servant, or a grandmother with a book of Virgil half open on her chest. The nap is communal but quiet. Eyes close and synced. Even the house mouse under the cupboard doesn't dare squeak. Historians still argue whether Romans considered these naps sacred or merely practical. There are inscriptions calling them the hour of the soul and others calling them necessary delays. But everyone seems to agree, missing your nap was foolish. Or, if you were dramatic, tragic. Even household slaves and workers were granted this rest period. Yes, the Roman system was harsh, stratified, and often brutal. But siesta time was one of the rare moments when nearly everyone, regardless of status, could pause. In some houses, cooks lay on the kitchen floor between meal prep. Gardeners used soft piles of clippings as makeshift pillows. Even the guard dog snoozed, tail twitching in a lazy dream about stolen sausages. And now, you stirred to another layer of this world, bedroom rituals. Romans didn't just crash onto beds. They had routines. First, the sandals came off. Next, the tunic was loosened, or entirely changed for a softer version made of flax or fine wool. Some people changed location entirely, moving from the main bed to a special napping bench by a shaded window. There were preferred positions, too. Side sleeping was common, and some even curled slightly into fetal poses, as described by Galen. The famous physician, the body rests best, he claimed, when folded like a resting cat. Speaking of Galen, medical advice about napping abounded. Sleep too long, and you risk sluggish blood. Nap too short, and the brain might remain overactive. Physicians recommended exactly 1 hour, no more, no less. To assist, some used water clocks, clepsydra, to time themselves, letting the gentle drip of water mark the descent into and rise from slumber. There's a documented case of one senator who kept a boy stationed by his bedside during nap time, not for security, but to whisper it has been an hour into his ear. That boy probably became the Roman god of punctuality. Let's zoom in on a particularly vivid domestic scene. You're reclining in a Roman villa just outside Pompeii, in a coastal town so still the only movement is the sun creeping across the tile. A slave fans you lazily with woven palm fronds. You're not rich, but today, you're pretending to be. You hear someone practicing flute in the garden, badly. There's a faint smell of rosemary from the kitchen. And somewhere in the distance, a neighbor yells at a goose. And then, stillness. You dream lightly. Maybe you're sailing the Tiber. Maybe you're at a chariot race, but everyone's moving in slow motion and all the horses look suspiciously like your childhood pet goat. Dreams didn't have to make sense. They just had to be soft. When you wake, there's no alarm. Just the shift of air, the stretch of your toes, and the house quietly coming back to life. Someone's sweeping. A cup is refilled. A baby fusses in the next room. The world reboots not with a bang, but a rustle. Napping at home wasn't just a habit, it was infrastructure for the soul. It provided insulation against the weight of politics, taxes, and the never-ending dust that clung to everything in Rome. It was a daily ritual that said, stop striving for just a moment. Let the day unfold like a scroll, slowly, quietly, one word at a time. And you, nestled into your humble little corner of the domus, become a part of that scroll. Unwritten, unread, but deeply, perfectly rested. You wake from the couch with a luxurious stretch, the kind where your spine audibly agrees with your life choices. The room is still dusky, cooled by the clever shade of the inner courtyard. But today, your nap isn't quite over, because now we slip from the domestic into the divine. You make your way quietly, sandals brushing mosaic, until the doorway reveals a sleepy Roman street once more. This time, your feet carry you to a space even more sacred than the home, the temple. Yes, the Romans had gods for war, gods for love, gods for plumbing, but they also honored sleep, dreams, and the slow drift between consciousness and the divine. Welcome to the temples of Somnus, where napping wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. Let's set the scene. You stand at the gates of a templum somni, a small sanctuary dedicated to the god of sleep. It's set into a hillside near Tibur, misty in the afternoon, surrounded by cypress trees that hush the wind. The temple itself is modest, with whitewashed walls and a small apse filled with incense smoke. Offerings line the steps, bundles of lavender, carved wooden pillows, even tiny clay eyes. Tokens left by those hoping for restful dreams or cures for stubborn insomnia. Inside, silence. Not because the place is empty, but because people here are asleep. You step lightly over the threshold and spot a few figures reclined on woven mats. A priest in simple linen quietly waves a feather fan over them. You're not intruding, you're joining. Because here, in these cults of rest, worship meant letting go. It meant giving yourself permission to drift, to invite somnus in. Historians still argue whether these sleep temples were common or niche. Some sources suggest they were rare, tucked into quiet corners and mostly used by the elite. Others believe that even small villages had altars to Somnus or his Greek counterpart, Hypnos, where offerings could be made before bed or during travel. What we know for certain, people took their dreams seriously. Very seriously. There were full-blown dream interpreters, onirokrati, who would decode the strange visions people experienced during temple sleeps. Did you dream of an owl flying backwards over a cabbage field? That might mean you're about to receive an unexpected letter. Or gas. It was hard to tell sometimes. But dreams weren't just symbolic. In some temples, dreams were diagnostic. You'd visit a temple specifically to sleep and, ideally, receive a dream from the god or goddess giving you medical advice. This was called incubation, and it was a formal, respected process. Some temples provided specific diets beforehand: no garlic, no wine, lots of herbs. Others included bathing rituals or fasting to purify the body before the dream. The Temple of Asclepius in Rome had an entire annex for dream sleeping. You'd lie down in a sacred space, inhale oils of poppy and myrrh, and hope the god would visit you in your dream to suggest a cure. Apply fish scales to the knee, or avoid beans for 3 days. Highly specific, slightly odd, inexplicably soothing. You recline now on a soft mat, your head resting on a slight incline of stuffed wool. A priest offers you a small cloth soaked in lavender and fennel oil. You place it on your forehead. The room smells like a garden at dusk. Someone nearby mumbles gently in their sleep. It's almost enough to make you forget you're in a functioning religious space. But that's the beauty of it. Romans didn't compartmentalize rest as separate from religion. Sleep was a kind of communion, a sacred act that allowed the body and spirit to realign. In a world buzzing with orators, chariots, and looming taxes, sleep temples provided a rare gift: sanctioned silence. And Somnus himself? He was depicted not as terrifying or cold, but gentle. A young man with wings on his temples and a cloak dusted with poppy petals. He lived, so the stories went, in a cave where the sun never shone, and no cock ever crowed. The river Lethe, forgetfulness, flowed nearby. Even the gods, it was said, entered quietly when they needed rest. One minor myth tells of a senator who attempted to bribe a Somnus priest to guarantee a dream in which he won his court case. The priest, of course, refused. Somnus couldn't be bribed. He wasn't just a god, he was an equalizer. A reminder that even emperors drooled in their sleep. Now, nestled in this hush, you feel your own body begin to float again. Maybe it's the incense. Maybe it's the warm stone beneath you. Or maybe, just maybe, Somnus has taken notice. You feel the air shift around you like the edge of a dream. Everything softens. One priest tiptoes past you, barefoot, holding a small scroll. She's jotting down the details of someone else's dream. You catch a snippet: was flying through figs, then landed on a goat's back. Relatable. Elsewhere in the temple, a soft harp begins to play, 5 notes, maybe 6, before fading into nothing. The sound echoes like a memory. Outside, the wind through the trees sounds suspiciously like someone sighing in relief. And just like that, you remember something important. The Romans didn't nap because they were lazy. They napped because they knew how to live cyclically. Rest wasn't a pause, it was a return. A spiral back to self, to balance, to the center of the wheel. The temple fades gently from around you, like a dream evaporating with dawn light. But the peace it gave? That lingers, even now. You rise softly from the temple's shadow and step back into the midday bustle of Rome, the air now warm and humming with activity. The city feels different after that quiet, as if you've just left a secret world inside a bubble of stillness. But life must go on, and the art of napping, official or private, continues to weave through daily Roman routines like an invisible thread. Today, your path leads to a different kind of rest spot, the thermae, or public baths. These were not just places for scrubbing dirt and gossip. They were the social centers where Romans napped, talked, ate, and did, well, a lot of things besides bathing. You enter the vast complex, steam curling from hot pools and the faint scent of olive oil and herbs mixing in the warm air. The floors are smooth marble, cool underfoot, and the sound of running water mingles with soft conversations. You notice people reclining on benches, their eyes closed, sometimes with fingers lightly tapping in time to a tune only they hear. The thermae were places of gentle indulgence, a perfect environment for a restorative nap. Wealthy Romans might lie down on marble slabs or soft cushions, while others rested on wooden benches in quieter alcoves. Bathing and napping blended seamlessly, as if the water's warmth invited the body into relaxation and the mind to drift. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bathhouses had designated nap zones, complete with padded lounges and attendants whose job was to ensure peace. Imagine a Roman version of a sleepy lifeguard, only they shushed louder. The idea was to create sanctuaries of calm amidst the lively bustle. And food? Oh yes, small snacks were often enjoyed before or after the nap: dates, nuts, honeyed wine. The ancient equivalent of your afternoon tea and biscuits, but with more toga flair. Yet, it wasn't just about luxury. The baths served as informal health clinics too. Physicians recommended soaking in the warm waters to relax muscles before a short nap, helping cure ailments like insomnia or digestive sluggishness. One doctor even suggested a routine of alternating cold and hot baths followed by a rest to balance the humors, a kind of ancient hydrotherapy and sleep cocktail. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of bath naps contributed to longer Roman lifespans or just a well-rested elite's illusion of immortality. Either way, the ritual persisted across social classes, a testament to the Romans' practical approach to rest. Now, imagine yourself drifting off on a sunlit marble bench, the warmth seeping deep into your skin, the faint echo of water splashing a soothing rhythm. Nearby, a poet recites softly, words flowing like a gentle stream as you drift in and out of consciousness. The bathhouse even had its own subtle etiquette for naps. Snoring was politely ignored or attributed to the gods communicating, especially when the snores sounded like distant thunder. Dreaming aloud, however, was frowned upon unless you wanted a gentle elbow from a friend or an amused smile from a nearby philosopher. And then there was the nap robe, a lightweight cloak worn specifically to signal I'm resting, please don't disturb. If you forgot it, you might be woken by a well-meaning stranger wanting to debate Cicero or the latest gladiator match. In fact, some Roman poets and writers waxed poetic about bath naps, describing them as moments of transcendence, when the body briefly escapes the city's noise, and the soul listens to its own quiet music. One amusing story tells of a senator who fell asleep so deeply in the baths that he missed a crucial political meeting. His friends joked that the only laws he'd enforce that day were those of sleep and comfort. You, however, wake gently, feeling as if you've floated through an hour-long lullaby. The world sharpens again, the marble cools, the voices rise. The baths return to their lively rhythm, and the day beckons. But something lingers in your chest, a sense of gratitude for this ancient practice of balancing work and rest, public life and private pause. Rome might be a city of noise and ambition, but here, in these tranquil nooks, the art of napping teaches you a simple truth. Even the busiest lives need moments to stop, breathe, and just be. The warmth of the bath still clings softly to your skin as you leave behind the marble and mist, stepping now toward a quieter, humbler scene. The bustling market streets of ancient Rome. Here, the symphony of daily life hums at a steady pace, vendors calling out their wares, the clatter of carts, the faint aroma of baked bread mingled with the sharp tang of herbs. You weave through stalls laden with fresh figs, olives, and wild honey. But your destination is not food or barter today. Instead, you're seeking something more subtle, the rhythms of rest woven into the busiest hours of the city. It turns out, even in the marketplace, the ancient Romans found pockets of calm, moments stolen to rest before returning to the fray. Picture a vendor, a man with sun-leathered skin and a wool tunic, who, after loudly hawking his wares of textiles and pottery, slips behind a stack of crates. He sits, legs stretched out, head tilted back, and closes his eyes for a brief moment, just enough to reset before the next round of shouting matches with customers. Quirky detail alert: some market stalls had small, hidden cushions or mats tucked away precisely for these micro-naps, a clever workaround to Rome's bustling pace. Not exactly official, but effective. You can almost hear the faint hum of the city fade as the vendor breathes slowly, the sharp cries of merchants and buyers softening in the background. A stray dog curls up nearby, sharing the moment of peace. Historians still argue whether these brief rests in the marketplace were socially accepted or quietly frowned upon. Some ancient writers depict napping vendors as lazy or foolish, while others hint at a grudging respect for their ability to catch a few winks amid chaos. Meanwhile, street performers and musicians, those tireless entertainers, had their own secret rituals for rest. Some would hide behind columns or in darkened alleys, humming quietly or rocking gently on their haunches, eyes fluttering shut between sets. One musician's guild reportedly passed down a nap code, a set of gestures indicating "I'm resting. Please no requests." The city itself seemed to breathe in cycles of work and rest, a living organism with quiet pockets scattered like calm pools. Let's not forget the street vendors selling honeyed wine and spiced nuts, perfect fuel for a short burst of energy followed by a gentle lull. You find yourself lingering near a small bakery, where the baker's apprentice wipes flour-dusted hands on a worn cloth and closes his eyes briefly beside a warm oven. The aroma of baking bread mixes with his slow breaths, and for a moment, the busy street noise fades into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. Interestingly, some scholars suggest these micro-naps and moments of quiet in public spaces help maintain mental sharpness and social bonds, a sort of ancient mindfulness practice before the term even existed. The Romans' knack for carving out rest, even in the most unlikely places, tells you something about their daily lives. They weren't just ambitious builders and warriors, they were people who understood the value of pause, of the gentle art of stepping back. You catch a glimpse of a street artist painting a fresco on a crumbling wall, pausing every now and then to close his eyes and let inspiration catch him like a passing breeze. The market comes alive again, the cries louder, the crowds thicker, but you carry with you that whisper of calm, that memory of the gentle nap hidden in plain sight. As you move on, you remember the words of a Roman poet who once wrote, "Rest is the soul's sweet ally, even amid clamor and toil." And right now, in this busy city street, you feel that alliance deeply. Leaving the lively streets behind, you now find yourself wandering toward a quieter, more personal space, the Roman home. Unlike the public baths or bustling markets, here in the Domus, rest takes on a more intimate, ritualistic quality, woven carefully into the fabric of family life. You push open a wooden door, the hinges creaking softly, and step into a shadowy atrium. The air smells faintly of olive oil lamps and fresh herbs drying on a string near the hearth. The stone floor is cool beneath your feet, offering a welcome contrast to the warm sun outside. Here, napping wasn't just a luxury, it was an art form passed down through generations. The Romans prized the meridiatio, their midday nap, and homes were designed with this in mind. You glance toward a low couch draped with woven wool throws, a favored spot for the paterfamilias to recline after the noon meal. Pillows are soft, filled with feathers or wool, crafted for comfort rather than show. It's easy to imagine slipping into a gentle doze here, the distant sounds of the street muffled by thick walls and curtains. The meridiatio was more than a brief rest, it was a sacred pause in the day's rhythm. Some Romans timed it precisely, allowing the body to reset before afternoon tasks resumed. The ritual even included a light snack, perhaps a handful of dried figs or a sip of wine diluted with water. A quirky detail: some families kept small statuettes of Somnus or Hypnos near the napping couch, believed to bless the sleeper with peaceful dreams. You might spot a tiny clay figure with wings or a sleepy face, quietly watching over the household's rest. Historians still argue whether the meridiatio was practiced universally or primarily among the wealthy. While the elite had spacious homes and servants to ensure quiet, evidence suggests even common Romans stole moments of rest when possible. You wander to the kitchen area, where the aroma of herbs simmers gently. Nearby, a woman tends to a small loom, weaving textiles as her toddler naps beside her. The house is alive with soft noises, the crackling of a fire, the murmur of quiet conversation, the faint tapping of sandals on stone. Sleep wasn't seen as passive or lazy, it was regenerative, the body's way of rebalancing after the morning's exertions. You pause by a small table holding oil lamps and scrolls. Some Romans believed that reading poetry or philosophy before a nap could guide dreams toward wisdom or insight. Imagine dozing off with the soft cadence of Virgil or Ovid still echoing in your ears. Sometimes, the household slaves played a role in the meridiatio. They might gently fan the resting family member or prepare a refreshing washcloth scented with mint and rose to awaken them later. A careful balance of respect and service. One playful myth speaks of a Roman emperor who declared a law about nap times, assigning official inspectors, somniorum magistri, to ensure no citizen skipped their midday rest. While this tale may be exaggerated, it reflects how seriously the culture took rest. As the afternoon light filters through the windows, you feel yourself sink into that same soft rhythm. The hum of domestic life becomes a lullaby, and the weight of the day gently lifts. In this small sanctuary, you remember that even the most ambitious Romans cherished moments of quiet and restoration. Sleep was a thread in their tapestry, woven with care and respect. The day moves on outside, but here, in the heart of the home, time slows just enough to breathe. As the sun begins to dip behind the terracotta rooftops of ancient Rome, casting long, soft shadows across the city, you find yourself drifting toward one last quiet corner, the scholarly world of Roman philosophy and medicine, where ideas about sleep and rest swirl like gentle streams through centuries of thought. You settle into a cool stone study, the scent of parchment and ink lingering in the air. Scrolls and tablets lie neatly stacked, the faded handwriting of wise men and women whispering their secrets. In this calm retreat, sleep is not just a biological necessity, it's a subject of deep contemplation. Philosophers like Seneca and Galen wrote about the virtues of rest, its connection to the soul, and the dangers of neglecting it. Seneca, for example, advised against the excesses of late-night revelry and encouraged his readers to embrace the natural rhythms of the body. He believed that proper rest sharpened the mind and strengthened virtue, helping one face life's challenges with clarity and calm. Meanwhile, Galen, the famous physician, developed detailed theories about sleep's role in balancing the body's humors, the ancient concept of fluids that governed health. He recommended specific sleeping positions and bedtime routines to promote the best rest. Imagine the gentle aroma of lavender or chamomile, scents used to soothe restless minds even 2 millennia ago. A quirky detail to note: some Roman doctors suggested a small pillow filled with crushed herbs or even ground mint to encourage pleasant dreams and ward off nightmares. It's almost like an ancient aromatherapy pillow, long before modern wellness trends. Historians still argue whether these medical and philosophical views were accessible only to the elite or if common Romans absorbed these ideas through everyday practices and oral traditions. You picture a student of philosophy reclining on a simple couch, eyes half closed, pondering the nature of dreams and consciousness while the sounds of the city fade into a distant murmur. Sleep, in this thoughtful world, becomes a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. The Romans believed that dreams could reveal hidden truths or divine messages, making rest a moment of mystery and potential insight. Yet, despite these lofty ideas, the practical side of Roman sleep habits shines through. Nap inspectors, bathhouse slumbers, marketplace dozes, and family meridiatios all speak to a culture that respected the gentle necessity of rest amid ambition and daily toil. As you prepare to leave this serene study, you feel the slow tide of sleep pulling at your own eyelids, a reminder that the art of resting well is as timeless as the stones beneath your feet. The city outside quiets down now, lamps flicker to life, and the soft chorus of night insects begins. In the hush of this moment, remember, the Romans, like you, needed their rest. It was, and remains, the truest luxury of life. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day has faded gently away, and you find yourself drifting on the calm waves of quiet thought and soft memories. Imagine the warmth of a Roman home settling into twilight, the comforting glow of lamps casting shadows that dance like ancient whispers. Your breath slows, becoming deep and even, as the cares of the waking world dissolve into a peaceful silence. The hum of the city fades into a distant murmur, replaced by the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, a soothing drum that lulls you further into rest. Allow the quiet moments of history to wrap around you like a soft blanket, the echoes of centuries gently carrying you towards sleep. Feel the comfort in knowing that the ancient world, with all its grand stories and tiny details, also cherished the simple gift of pause. Rest is the thread that connects us across time, binding you to a world where naps were sacred, dreams were guides, and every breath was a chance to renew. Now, let your mind wander softly, as the night embraces you with its gentle quiet. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.